Welcome to the TCJ podcast, where we discuss curious, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial ideas through the lens of biblical wisdom. I'm your host, Keith Wood. Today, my guest is Gib Wood. Gib, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be very odd, but I got to get through the introduction and then it'll all make sense. So Gib Wood is a Trinity alumnus. He's currently working as the field administrator for Europe and the field administrator of pastoral care for Baptist Missions to Forgotten Peoples. And he has just returned to America after 39 years as a missionary to the U.S. military populations in Germany. And I'm biased, but I would say most importantly, he is my dad.
That would be at the top of the list.
I probably will dispense with saying Gib henceforth. But thank you for being here. It's happy to have you. And we're catching you at an interesting time. I mean, 39 years on the mission field in Germany. I think as of today, you're 2 weeks back in the States. So this is a very fresh transition.
Yes.
And so I figured, that's an interesting time. Let's see if we can't capture some of what's going on right now and have some interesting conversations.
Sounds great.
So my hope is to get you to reflect back on your years of ministry and specifically to think about some things that you regret about your time on the mission field.
Do we have time?
But to begin, I want to paint like kind of a high level picture of your experience. If you can remember, when you first left for Germany about 40 years ago, what were some of the expectations that you had of missionary life? What were you thinking going into it?
That's a great question. One of the things is that I had a distinct advantage in that I was saved while I was in the military in Germany. And so I grew up, spiritually speaking, around missionaries pretty much every day. Mm-hmm. So I was in the fire department in the Air Force, and we'd work a 24-hour shift, and then I'd get off, and then I'd spend that next day with missionaries, many of whom, of course, you grew up around, like Mickey Johnson and your grandfather, Brother McBride, Opa, and tons of others. And so I spent all of my time really getting to know them. So when Kathy and I made the transition to the field, it really wasn't a big we're going to reach thousands of people, because we were coming at it pretty much with our eyes open already. Mm-hmm. So that was very, very helpful. At the same time, we came with this kind of idea that we had to produce something, because there were people that were supporting us, and their expectations, whether reasonable or unreasonable, were still their expectations. And so I think probably the first regret would be that I was trying really hard to measure up to the expectations of others. And the last 40 years has taught me that that's really a waste of time.
Okay. So that's interesting though. So the missionary context for you, because you became a believer there, that was almost like your home church experience that you were going back to as a missionary, right?
Exactly.
Not a lot of people probably have that experience when they're going into missions.
Yeah, whether in the States or on a foreign field, I think that's true. What's really interesting is that I came to know the Lord at Rhineland back in 1978. And
Rhineland being the name of the church
Rhineland
that you've
Baptist
pastored
Church,
for the last 34
years.
Yeah.
and that's it, because when we went to the field, I first pastored a little work called North Haven Baptist Church near Bremerhaven in northern Germany, and that was an awesome work. Your brother was born there, and it was in a farming area. Of course, I grew up on a farm in Maine, and so it was like, wow, this is really cool. And then I started learning German there, and lots of different things transpired there. But after about 5 years, then we transitioned to Rhineland when the Lord opened the door for me to become the pastor at Rhineland Baptist Church. And so, so for me, it literally was going back home as far as the church was concerned. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really a pretty cool transition that way.
So What were some of the biggest surprises that you encountered in those early times, whether good or bad surprises?
One of the big surprises was that people came to church.
Okay.
That was a big surprise because I mean, I look back. I've kept a lot of the messages that I preached in those days, and uh, I don't think there was ever any intentional heresy, but it was pretty borderline on some
Okay.
stuff. And so I've come back and I've looked at some of those things, and it's like, oh my soul, why did anybody come back to church the second time? But it was such a great experience as far as growing. North Haven was, in my estimation, and for where Mom and I were and what we were going through, Kathy and I were, we it was just the perfect growing place for us. We had enough ups and downs in it so that we learned dependence and we learned a little bit of humility. We learned that we weren't all it, especially me. I wasn't all it. I didn't have all the answers, and so it was really cool in that those people were used of the Lord really to grow me into a missionary pastoral kind of role that I don't think, if I had gone straight to Rhineland in 1986, I think that probably would have been a very short-lived ministry.
Because it was a more like a larger, more established church, or
It
why
was
is that?
it was larger, it was more established, and I would have been following Brother Roy Grigsby, who was a very, very well established and respected missionary pastor, and a great Bible teacher, a phenomenal Bible teacher. And in those days, I was much more of a topical preacher than I was an expository preacher. And Brother Roy was much more of an expository preacher. Actually, I learned more about expository preaching just hanging around him. So, so I would have gone to Rhineland. Had I gone straight there, I would have gone very ill prepared for that ministry.
How do you see yourself as you think back to kind of your attitude and approach to being a pastor, a missionary back then? Some people approach things like that and they have a sort of imposter syndrome, like I really don't belong here, but I'm just gonna see what I can do, and hopefully nothing too embarrassing will happen. And then other people go in kind of the opposite, like I've got this,
Yeah,
it's gonna be fine, and then find out that maybe they weren't as
yeah.
prepared as they thought. If you were to pick one of those, which would you say you aligned with more?
I was totally ill prepared. I mean, as far as me, you
Did you
know.
feel that though? Like, did you feel ill prepared relative to what was going on, or did
Well, let
you?
me throw an
Okay,
anecdote in
okay,
again that might give you a little bit of a clue. So we'd been at North Haven for probably, I don't know, 2 months, and I was, I don't know, 27, 29 years old, something like that. And I get a phone call from one of the ladies who was a member of the church, and she was about 40. And she said, Pastor, I really need to talk to you. And so I we met, and she said, she started going on with this litany. I mean, it lasted for almost 2 hours. And when it was all said and done, the best thing that came out of that was, so how, I asked her, so how long has this been going on? And she said, oh, 18 years. And I said, oh. And I did not have a clue as to what to say, what to do. So I just said, let's just pray and we'll ask the Lord to give wisdom in this. And so we prayed and I left. And then I get home and I tell my wife, I said, babe, you're not going to believe what just happened. And she said, so tell me about it. So I told her the whole thing, and your mom cracked up. She busted out laughing. And I said, babe, why are you laughing? This is a pretty serious situation. And she said, "Oh no, I'm not laughing about the situation. I'm just laughing at the thought that you could fix anything." So that pretty well summed up how I
Yeah.
felt about going into it. Yeah, ill prepared. Um, it's not a college thing. I think really, I mean,
We're
I
not paying you to say
reflect.
that.
Yeah, no, we're not. I reflect on my years. I started at Tennessee Temple for 2 years, and before I came to Jacksonville and graduated here. Um, and the one thing that I really learned from college was that college is not to give you answers, it's really to prepare you to ask questions so that as you face situations, you're saying, okay, Lord, what do I do now? And that's what I got more out of college than anything else
Hmm.
was don't be afraid to ask questions. So that was really helpful.
Yeah.
And that little anecdote just reiterated
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's
the
helpful. I
importance
could
of it.
imagine people listening to this who have thought about missions for themselves and hearing that, thinking like, okay, the idea that a person is going to go to the mission field and have all the answers is kind of ludicrous, right?
Oh, that's a kind way of saying it.
Okay.
It's idiotic.
Okay. Yeah. So, at least from your experience, though, going in and feeling a little bit in over your head is kind of normal, par for the course, would you
Yeah.
say?
I mean, maybe you could describe it as hitting the ground drowning.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Um, Looking back, and I guess we could go a little bit more, we don't have to focus specifically on the early days, but as you think about your time in Germany, what is one regret from your ministry that you would feel comfortable sharing?
Hmm.
Maybe something you'd do differently if you were going to do it again.
Um, wow. I mean, how many days do we have? I would say that one of the things that I had to learn early on was don't make hasty decisions. Um, in my own personal experience, every time, I mean, this is 100% of the time, but every time I made a hasty decision, it ended up being a bad decision. So I'd say that one of the things that I would share with people who are considering ministry, but specifically missions, is take your time making decisions, even when you get pressured by other people. I mean, even within the last 4 or 5 months, I've been through some pretty rough stuff um, that required decision making. And there were people who were just really pressuring me to make a very, very tough decision, which would have been very life altering for a whole number of people. And my thought was that I'm not going to do that because every hasty decision I've ever made has ended up being the wrong one. And when you're dealing with people's lives, you don't want to make wrong decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the greatest the greatest takeaway from the last 40 years in Germany has been slow down.
How would you distinguish between, I mean, when you're dealing with people's lives, you don't want to be hasty, but when you're dealing with people's lives, there are also situations that seem to require urgency. What's
Yeah,
the difference?
yeah, no, that's legit. I was actually thinking about that earlier today. There are biblical principles. So when somebody comes along and says, I'm thinking about murdering somebody, you can make a pretty hasty decision and say, no, that's wrong. Don't do that. But at the other time, or on the other hand, there are decisions that people are making which are um, maybe they're more emotionally driven, or maybe they are more personal experience driven, and that are not tied directly. I want to be careful here. Um, I mean, it's not like you're going to go to the Bible and say, you know,
Thou shalt do this or that.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, there's not a thou shalt or shalt not relative to this particular thing. And so rather than saying to them, okay, hey, get this dealt with right now, let me look at it this way. So somebody comes and they say, I'm struggling with assurance of salvation. I think one of the things that I learned very early on from, I would consider a fallacious teaching, and it wasn't from school, it was from somebody else. It was, just tell them, hey, let's just say, go through the Romans road and you can pray and there it'll be
Oh,
settled.
okay.
And so now, instead, what I do and what I have done for years, when somebody comes with a lack of assurance, I say, okay, let's sit down and let me give you just something to consider. Would you pray and say, Lord, as I begin, you show me, am I truly saved? Am I truly not saved? But let's do it from a Bible perspective. So what I tend to do is say, today read 1 John 1 and 1 John 5. And pray that before you do that. And then tomorrow read 1 John 2 and 1 John 5. And then 3 and 5, 4 and 5, and 5 and 5. And here's the reason why, because most of the time when we say, hey, listen, just repeat after me, let's pray, and you'll get it settled. And then 2 weeks later, they're doing the same thing all over again. But if the answer comes from Scripture, then they can be settled because they can always refer to the Word of God. And the Word of God then gives them that confidence. So that takes time. And you don't get to notch, another decision in your
Right.
salvation holster, but for them, and they're the one we ought to be concerned with, for them, it's like, wow, I understand it now. I see it now because God has said, hey, I can know. And now I know either I am not saved and I know what I need to do, or I am saved and now I need to walk in that confidence.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like one of the driving principles there is what is my motivation in dealing with this problem as kind of a delineating factor between hastiness and urgency. Because in the situations you're talking about, there's this tension between I don't necessarily want to spend all day dealing with this problem, right?
Right.
But I've got a person here who needs to be heard, and they need to have somebody sit with them and what they're dealing with, and be willing to do whatever work is necessary to get them through this.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe as a first pass, hastiness might have something to do with if I'm approaching this person as a problem to be solved as opposed to like a person to be helped or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think that's one of the things too that happens a lot in ministry, and I'm terrible. According to the standard I got taught, I am absolutely the worst person in the world to send on a hospital visit, because go to the hospital, you got 2 minutes, say hi, how are you, let's pray, see you later. I go to a hospital and I'm 2 hours later, I'm still there talking with the person. But I think that that's legit because it's the person I'm concerned with. It's not how many people I quote unquote.
How many hospital rooms I can report in my
Exactly.
prayer letter that I
Yeah,
visited, right?
yeah. I mean, it is ludicrous,
Yeah.
If ministry is about people, people are messy and people take time, and it's not always convenient.
Yeah. Are there any kind of shifting a little bit to away from the problem of hastiness? Are there any decisions that you made early on or priorities that you had in your ministry that you're especially grateful that you did commit to?
Yeah. Um, I would say that the most important um, things to prioritize. One is what we do is for the glory of God. It's not about us. Number two, it's about people. It's not about us. Number three, it's about service. So our motto has been glorify God, love people, serve others. And we used that as our motto at Rhineland for the last 10 or 15 years. And we have kind of adopted that. Your mom and I have kind of adopted that as our own motto for ministry. So what we now, when we look at something, like we're going to be in India teaching in a Bible college in January, and then going to a missionary encouragement conference, and then teaching another, I just found out this morning actually, teaching another pastor seminar among the Aka Hill Tribe people in northern Thailand. Why do we do those things? Well, it's a means for us to glorify God. It's a means for us to love people. It's a means for us to serve others. All of that gets wrapped up in just being faithful to what God's put in your hands to do. Mm-hmm. So faithfulness then becomes the mark of the ministry of the individual.
So as you've tried to kind of orient your life and ministry around these principles, are there any particular stories of transformation, whether an individual or a family, that stick out to you that have kind of been the result of that, that you find particularly encouraging? Or
so we're talking about other people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, you could share if you are the person you want to talk about, then that's fine too. You can share. In fact, do that. Yeah.
Is that a setup?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that the fact that you asked it that way is interesting, right? So as you made that your mission for ministry, what do you feel like that's done in you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think what it has transformed in me, I'm more able to relax in doing ministry. So, for example, at Rhineland, in Germany, in most of Europe, doing tract work or, Bible literature distribution is legal. You can put a tract in a mailbox unless it's labeled that they don't want it. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, but you can do that. So I would go out a lot. Well, there were certain people that would say to me, well, what a waste of time. Well, I don't worry about what they feel because being out there so many times gave me the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations with people. Did they all lead to salvation decisions? No, but that's not my responsibility. I can relax. All I got to do is go out there and glorify God, love people, and serve others. That's it. And so that takes the pressure off. When I go to the pulpit, I am not here to wax eloquent. I am here to glorify God, love people, and serve others. And so, do I think I preached a good message? There are many times when I don't. But at the same time, my preaching a good message is not the reason I'm there. The reason I'm there is to glorify God mm-hmm. first and foremost and be faithful in doing that.
Right. Which can involve your preparation. You're not saying that you need to be ill-prepared or something
exactly.
like that.
No.
Right?
You still have to do your diligence, and you still have to, put in the time mm-hmm. and put in the effort, and you still have to study, and, all those things are legit, and they are part of your responsibility, but the pressure is off. So I don't look at ministry as I am under the gun. Mm-hmm. I look at ministry as an opportunity now to fulfill those three overriding principles. Mm-hmm. And that takes a lot of pressure off.
It sounds like you're pretty resistant to quantifiable metrics as being kind of an indicator for how ministry is going. Is that accurate?
I am not against those who measure things. I've never been good at math. So, so,
That's pretty funny.
I guess I don't think of it so much. I mean, there is a place for that, um, you know, but in our context, because we were dealing primarily with military ministry, you can't measure, where your church attendance was last year versus where it is at the same time this year, because all it takes is one rotation
Right.
from the military, and well, that went out the door,
Yeah.
So
One base being shut down, which happened
which
in
happens,
northern
yeah,
Germany, right?
that's right, yeah, and so those kinds of things, the dynamic is different. So it's not fair to say that quantifiable metrics is bad or evil or wicked or anything like that, but you do have to measure it in its context. And so my context was um, always fluid. So the ups and downs are different than they would be in your typical stateside community-based ministry.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking specifically of quantification with regards to like the literature distribution.
Oh yeah,
The emphasis is not on being able to have something to report to someone else,
right,
right?
right. No, to me, it's much more a matter of, Lord, use this to open a door, use this to open a conversation, use this, by the power of your Spirit to draw somebody into the services, whether it's the German services that Brother Wilson has or our English-speaking services. Yeah, use these things, and he does.
You've worked with a lot of different missionaries in many different places and contexts. How often do you see the pressure to, really make that prayer letter sparkle and pop? Like, how real is that in the lived experience of missionaries? Is that a driving factor in the way that many of them do ministry?
It is a driving factor in the way they write prayer letters.
Okay.
I think that one of the sad things about missionary life, and I want to be careful here because there are churches that have expectations that this missionary is going to produce. Well, the reality is missionaries never saved anybody, but they can be involved. He is the Lord of the harvest, but we can be involved in the harvesting as he uses us. It was interesting when I was on what we now call pre-field ministry, what has frequently been called deputation. When Mom and I were on in that process, we met. I went to a preacher's fellowship one time in Maine, and there were probably, I don't know, 20 guys there and church members and stuff. And I heard this guy start talking about, his normal day. And this was my thought. It's like, man, he's not doing anything. And then I was talking with somebody that I had gone to that meeting with. We were driving back home, and I was talking with him, and and my friend, he said, Brother Woody, I know why you're saying that, but that guy has been at that church for 40 plus years it's a tiny little community that he's in, and he's just faithful. He's just steady. And I got out of the car and I thought, boy, you really are a jerk. Talking about me, not about my friend.
Right.
Because I was looking at it from this totally, notch it down. And then, missionaries, they feel like they have to produce something in their prayer letter. And thankfully, I think there's a lot of guys today that are kind of past that, and a lot of pastors and churches which are also getting past that, so that it's not It's not like it was when I was starting out, but it's still there. I mean, it's still there. So there is a pressure, and I think, you know, as guys go on pre-field ministry and are, if they will go with the attitude, hey, I'm going to go to be a blessing to that church and to those people. I am not going there for support. If I'm a blessing to churches, to pastors, to people, the Lord's going to take care of the support. But if I go trying to raise support, that's not going to be good for anybody.
When you talk to people who are interested in full-time missions, what are some of the biggest apprehensions that you encounter as people are just even considering it? And also, as a follow-up, to what extent do you see those apprehensions as legitimate?
I think one of the things is, I mean, there are a lot of people who are maybe in their 40s and 50s who really have a heart for missions, but they think they're too old. They think, oh man, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, from a biblical perspective, Moses really didn't do much until he was about 80. So really, I haven't even started to do anything yet. I'm going to be 69 this month, and so my productive years, if we're using the Moses standard, are down the road yet. So anyway, I think that we kind of got to get past this idea that I'm young, I can do it. I heard a guy one time when we were on pre-field, it was in a missions conference in Delaware, and this guy was a missionary to Italy, and he said, every person in this room ought to consider missions. And then he said, and some of you are saying, are you out of your mind? I'm 65 years old. I should consider missions. And this was how he responded. He said, well, listen, you're going to die somewhere. Why not die on the mission field? I thought, wow, that was pretty in your face, wasn't it?
Yeah, there have been a few people. I have several faces in my mind right now, but there's a couple that's actually staying with my wife and I, Jim and Rachel Chambers, and they just moved back to the States about a year ago, maybe a year and change ago. They were missionaries in the rural Zambia, out in the bush in Zambia for, I believe, about 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I know that they moved there when Jim was 42, I believe, which, I mean, a 30-year ministry begun at 42 is insane, in my opinion. That's like unbelievable. And similarly, my wife's grandpa, Bob Patton, moved to Suriname, South America when he was 50.
Yep.
Again, bush ministry, like not city missions. They were roughing it.
Yeah.
And while there, translated the entire Bible into the local dialect. Post 50. I mean, that to me removes all excuses in terms of age.
Well, think of it this way. I mean, all that Moses really did was after 80, right? But that doesn't mean that the pre-80 years were a waste. All of that time was preparation. And you look at the life of Jesus, his ministry is frequently looked at as just being those 3 years between his baptism and his crucifixion and resurrection and ascension. But that does not mean that those 30 years prior to that were wasted years. Those were preparation years. So here you've got this guy like Bob Patton who did an entire career, and does that mean it wasn't effective? No, it means God was using all of those experiences to prep him, so when he gets to the field, he's remarkably effective.
Yeah, and I want to maybe clarify, like, I don't think that, I don't believe, and I don't think that you believe that missionary work is somehow more important or is more valuable in God's eyes than any other kind of work. I mean, Bob Patton was a medical doctor before he went into missions, right? And I know that he was doing very important work. He was glorifying God through that work. Right. there's actually another alumnus of Trinity named Steve Gant, who is a missionary in Guyana, and he wrote a book called A Lifetime of Preparation. He was a former military guy, retired, and
Right.
then ended up going to the mission field. And he was expressing the same thing. So many people think that it's too late for me, and exactly what you're saying. No, God can use all this stuff that's happened. And again, it's not to say that all of that was just preparation and it's all wasted in some way if you're not a
No.
missionary. Like, no, there's value in work in and of itself. But it is to say that God can use all of that preparation
Right.
for missions. And so don't let the fact that you think you're too far along be a deterrent from getting
So,
involved.
so following along that same line, if I look back on my life, my dad was a dairy farmer. Dairy farming was not really high on my list of goals for the rest of my life. But now, as I look back on my life, I'm able to say, wow, there's some things I learned about just being faithful. Because if you're not
Mm,
faithful as a farmer, cows aren't going to be fed, crops aren't going to be harvested, on and on it goes. Well, faithfulness is absolutely essential in missions. It's essential in any avenue of life to be successful, but it's especially essential in ministry and especially essential when you're on a mission field. The rate of I don't like the word failure, but the rate of people who go to the mission field for 2 to 4 years and then never go back is remarkably high. And I think one of the reasons is because we don't put enough emphasis on the value of just being faithful. We've all heard of Judson, and he was in Burma for 7 years before he had a first convert. Well, if you're not faithful, you're not going to stay those 7 years. You
hmm
know, but look what happened after those 7 years. I mean, there was a whole Bible was put into the Burmese language, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people came to know the Lord. So, so faithfulness is so key to success in ministry.
And I think that's, I don't know that there's many more vivid examples of faithfulness than dairy farming. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a good example.
your gaffer was
Uh,
he was that.
I mean, yeah, cows are there whether you like it or not.
hmm And actually, there's a lot of correlations because cows are messy, and and ministry is frequently messy.
Maybe
So
we shouldn't pursue the correlations too far. Uh, if you could, what do you wish you could tell your younger self before going out onto the mission field? If you could give yourself some advice.
I would say in any avenue of ministry, whether it's missions, pastoral, teaching in a college or in a Christian school, or even in a public school, we'll use it in the context of somebody going into a missions pastoral ministry. One of the things that we need to understand is if you get called into that. I have never started a church from scratch. So I was called to two churches. That's all I've done is pastor two
hmm
churches on the mission field, primarily to the American military. The day that they say, we want you to be our pastor, and you say, yes, I believe that's the Lord's will for me, that's the day you become their preacher. But it is not until you go through deep water with them and you come out on the other side of those deep waters and you're still there and they're still there, or at least the majority of them are still there. That's the day you become their pastor. So being a preacher, that's the easy part. Being a pastor, and especially being a pastor on a foreign field, in another language, in another culture. The day you become their pastor is like a huge breakthrough. And then you begin to see the Lord doing phenomenal things through your ministry, not because of you, just because you've stayed and they've stayed, and through it all you've both learned. We just need to trust the Lord through this.
So, by way of the advice, maybe encouraging a little bit of patience. How would you articulate that as advice to a new missionary?
Yeah. Don't be in a hurry for results. Love your wife and kids. I would say my biggest regret for all of the years on the mission field, my biggest regret is that I got very caught up in thinking that I had to be there for everything. And as a result, you guys and Mom really suffered more than I mean, there are times in life and ministry when, hey, there was a car wreck and I've got to go. We all understand that. But I didn't have to be at every single meeting. I didn't have to be at every single, event. But that's kind of the mentality. I set myself up, basically. And you guys were the ones that really paid the price for that. So my regret would be that I got kind of sucked into that mentality that I had to be there. Life and ministry and church couldn't go on if I wasn't there. Thankfully, I think the last maybe, 15 or 20 years, the Lord has helped me to get over.
As soon as I left the house. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that helped.
Family's a lot easier to love when they're living on a different continent.
Audra was funny because after you guys were gone, we did the outside of our house, and we remodeled the bathroom and the kitchen and everything. And she came home and said, "Man, how come you guys did all of this stuff after we left?" I said, "Because we couldn't afford to when you guys were here."
Maybe just in closing, as you're transitioning back to the States, what aspects of life and ministry in Germany do you think you'll probably miss the most? And I know that's a hard, you're speculating right now, but as you think about it, what strikes you as something that you're going to miss?
I miss the fact that Germans know how to obey the rules of the road.
Sure.
And they know how to drive, and they know how to use blinkers. And I miss that already. I think that I will definitely. I mean, it hadn't hit me yet. I think that there's going to be this day when I'm going to wake up in tears, because I miss a lot of people, miss a lot of friends, miss a lot of, I mean, you put your life into a place for almost 35 years, and it's like, you look at it, and I'm not big on legacy. It's more important what the Lord gets glorified than that I have a legacy. At the same time, you look back and you say, "Boy, I hope I didn't screw this up too bad for the next guy, and I hope the next guy doesn't screw it up too bad for us as well."
What do you hope that your long-term impact will be? Not necessarily legacy, right? But what do you think that?
I hope that my long-term impact, hope when it's all said and done, that people will be able to look back and say he was faithful. More than anything, that was it. Just that he was faithful.
Well, all right. Dad, thank you for being here.
Thanks,
I've
Keith.
enjoyed the conversation, and to those who were listening in, we hope you enjoyed it as well, and hope to see you next time.